So it's my privilege to welcome to the stage the CEO of Steelcase, Mr. Jim Keane. Jim.
Thank you. Morning, Sam.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
So what were the challenges that you set out to solve with the solution you've developed?
Well, Satya talked yesterday about the modern workplace, and so let me just talk about that first, because that's really the root of the challenge. So we're all still working largely in the not-so-modern workplace, so we all know this very well, cubicles everywhere and private offices, and really that's a workplace designed around process. How do we optimize for process flows? And as work has changed, as automation has taken away a lot of the process work, as AI comes along and eliminates a lot of what's left, the workplace is becoming centered on knowledge work. And as that's happened, the workplace hasn't necessarily changed. So we're trying to do knowledge work in a space that's designed for process work. And that's why you see some of the problems, and some of the problems are really a paradox. As the video said, 46% of space goes unused in the workplace. And yet, a lot of people say they can't find the space they need to work. They can't find a place to concentrate. They can't find a place to meet with colleagues on short notice. They can't find a place to be able to work on tough problems as a project team for long periods of time uninterrupted. And when you're looking for a place, you end up spending a lot of time wandering around trying to find one, because the workplace is very dynamic and it's constantly changing. Sure. It's like the parking lot problem. You pull into a parking lot, you know there's a space there somewhere, right, but you just don't know where it is. And we believe that even with the limited data we have around utilization and workflows, that more data could be very helpful as people try to make sense of this shift from the old way of working to a new way of working.
So how are you seeing technology and space coming together to empower people in the workplace?
Yeah, so technology and space, furniture, have always been connected. Your world and our world have actually referenced each other. The reason cubicles are the way they are is because of mainframe computers and desktop computers, and the CRT needed a place to go. As laptops came along and mobile laptops and now all the range of devices, furniture continues to evolve. So it's always been true that technology and space were connected. But we see opportunities to do that even more. So we all own technologies, use technologies at work, and yet we only use a small fraction of what these technologies are capable of. And the trick to getting it used more completely is to change human behavior, but changing human behavior is hard. So space is actually really good at changing human behavior. If you move people from one space to a new space, you break a lot of those old patterns of behavior, and you have the opportunity to create new ones. And we've already seen that through some of our own experiments. A change in space can change the way people use technology they already own. We also see that technology can help us understand what's going on in space. It used to be easy. If you're a facility manager, you just walk around. You knew where people were assigned, where their desks were assigned. You knew which conference rooms were available. You could walk around once a day and get a pretty good sense of how the space is being used. But in today's dynamic environment, the way the space is used at 9 o'clock in the morning could be very different by 10 o'clock. Sure. Technology has the opportunity to give us more information about how space is being used so that we can reduce the amount of spaces that are in oversupply and add more spaces that are in high demand. And we've really not been able to do that until now.
So now that you're collecting all this data from space with the solution, what are some of the problems that you can solve with that?
Yeah, so the first problem has to do with users, and maybe I'll start just by talking about some of the technology we're deploying. Sure. So behind the Steelcase Personal Assistant and the Steelcase Workplace Advisor is Office 365. It already is rich with data about the people in the organization, the rooms in which they work, the calendaring, and so on. What we've never had is information about how space is really being used. You know the room is booked, but how many times have you walked up to a room that's booked and there's nobody there? Is that room really available or not? So with the addition of sensors in the workplace, we can actually begin to monitor real human behavior in real time. So layering actual human use, human behavior on top of the information that's in Office 365 gives us the potential to start to solve some of the problems people are facing. And the first of those problems has to do with users. So we know that users, and you think of yourselves, imagine it's 10 o'clock in the morning and suddenly you have to meet with some of your colleagues. In the old days, that was easy. Your colleagues sat in predictable places. They often sat right around you, and the room you would meet in would be right here. But today, people are all over the place. They're in informal areas, in cafes. They're traveling. You can try sending them a text message. They might be on an airplane. So we spend an awful lot of time just on the basic idea of how do I find my team? And once you find your team, then you got to figure out what's the right place to meet and how do I find a room to meet in. So we just wanted to start with those two simple problems and take all the data between the sensors and Office 365 and come up with an app that would make it easy. So we'll just demonstrate that here. So the personal assistant opens, and it really only does two things. It helps you find your teammates and helps you find rooms. Let's start with teammates. So you have a list of favorites. You just select the various people that you work with most often and say those 3 people are the ones you want to meet with. The app searches for them and discovers that 2 of them are here in town, in Los Angeles, say, and 1 of them is traveling. So right away, the app knows if you want to meet with these people in a physical space, you need to select a room that is enabled with video conferencing. Okay, so now you hit that button, and it offers you a variety of spaces, 3 spaces here that are all the right size for the kind of meeting you're having, and all have video conferencing. Maybe you're familiar with that room. You book it for the length of time you need, say 60 minutes. You hit reserve, and it reserves the space. And then continuing in the workflow, you can send invites directly from the app to the people on the team, so everybody knows when the meeting starts, when it ends, and what room it's going to be in. And that's, you could have left the app to go into Office 365 to do the same thing, but this is a way of doing it as part of a workflow that's designed from end to end. So from looking for your teammates, finding rooms, booking the rooms, sending the invites, it's all done from within the app. Now let's say you're in the meeting, and let's say you've been in these meetings, it's going great, you got 15 minutes to go, you get a quick reminder from the app, you have 15 minutes to go. And maybe you want to extend that room reservation.
Yeah.
You know, most of the time you don't even know if the room has been booked by somebody else. So you're getting to the top of the hour. Can I extend that room reservation? So again, right from the app, it reminds you 15 minutes ahead of time. If the room is available, it offers you the option of extending for additional time. Another interesting thing is that you get to the end of a meeting, and sometimes you're in a room, you'd love to tell somebody about things that worked and didn't work, but you have no way of doing that. In this app, you actually have a way of rating the room itself at the end, and let's say this one was just mediocre. Don't worry, IT, they love the technology, but the privacy wasn't so good. So you can send a note right from the app that says, you know, this room would be better if we had some frosted glass or some way of having a little bit more privacy. So remember that piece of data, because it's an important piece of data for something we also developed, which is called Steelcase Workplace Advisor.
That's great. And then all of these rooms are connected through sensors using Azure IoT built on top of your, what kind of data are you collecting? What kind of volume of data is this processing?
Yeah, it's an enormous amount of data. Just imagine these sensors in every conference room to start with. And then later on, they go into the in-between spaces, cafe areas, other places that people meet informally, individual spaces, both reserved and unreserved, assigned and unassigned. And then think about that for every floor of the building, every building on your campus, and every campus in your global campus.
Sure.
And there's a ton of data.
Quickly.
This would not have been possible without Azure.
Great.
It also raises concerns, though, because customers are quite concerned about things like security. In fact, there's a lot of other apps that have been out there before that are kind of one-off apps that have their own databases. And clients ask serious questions about what's going to happen with my data. You know, information about who's meeting with whom, about what topics, at what time, is proprietary information. You don't want your competitors to know about that. They're also concerned about reliability. They don't want these things breaking.
Right.
And they want it to be scalable. So it's great that it works on one floor or one building, but if I do want to extend it, it's why they have so much confidence when we tell them that it's been built on the Azure platform.
Cool.
Also related to this is security, personal security and personal information. Individuals have real valid concerns about their own information and how information about where I am and how I'm working might be used by others. We intentionally chose right from the start to do the personal location tracking as an opt-in. So each individual has a choice of whether they want to participate or not.
That's great.
And if they get value from the app and they feel that their colleagues are getting value from them being available in the app, then they'll choose to use it. And if they're not, if privacy is more important to them, then they can make their own choices. But we think people will generally use it because of the simplicity and the value.
That's great. It's very powerful. So now that all this data is being collected, how can building managers benefit?
Yeah, so building managers are also awash with data, but the data is not in a form that they can really use for their normal workflows. So we've worked with facility managers and real estate people for a long time. We understand the kinds of problems that they want to solve, and they want to get a better sense of this building. As I mentioned before, walking around just doesn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
So we built, off the same database, built an app for them. So when the facility manager opens their app in the morning, they get a dashboard that shows things that they choose to track, things like total building utilization or energy consumption. These are all things that are available in their building systems, but now we can put it on their start of the day dashboard. So one of the things that building owners and managers, facility managers are often dealing with is, what do I do when a team needs something special? It's one thing to reserve a room for an hour or a day, but what if a team needs to be together in a space that's dedicated to them for a long period of time? They want to get a better picture of how their space is utilized so they can assign them a space without being highly disruptive to the rest of the organization. So here they can go into the app and select the floor and see a heat map of use. Blue is heavily used spaces, and red are spaces that are hardly used. And then they can see the details behind each of those spaces to make a choice about which space would be perfect for this team, complete with data about each of those spaces. Another thing they often are trying to do is compare utilization within space. So here, let's take two spaces, about the same size. You would think they'd be used about the same amount. One's called Whitney and one's called Shasta, just two rooms for individuals to have heads down work. And you discover that Shasta is not really being used very much. So you can go into the app and look at a comparison of the two spaces side by side. So remember, Whitney on the right is the one that's used more, and Shasta on the left was used less. Now I can look at that and say, well, I can see some differences. I can see that Whitney has a height adjustable table, for example. I can see that it has more ergonomic performance and it has better lighting. So maybe it's one of those factors that could help Shasta be more heavily used. But let's go a little deeper. Maybe I can get more information about Shasta and what's holding it back. So going deeper on a particular space, you can see the utilization over different days and over different times of the day, but I can also see this input from users that we captured earlier. What are people saying about the space? People who've actually used the space, what are they saying about it? And what can I learn from that that might guide my next decision? Then the app suggests options. Options for ways you can improve the space in particular ways. So for example, let's say it's privacy, and you're trying to increase the privacy performance of this space. You can add an architectural film that just adds kind of a layer of frosting. It's very inexpensive. An inexpensive layer of frosting to improve privacy, and we've seen that this has worked in the past. Now, facility managers would like a little bit more data about that too, because we're still kind of guessing, is that really going to work? So over time, the app begins to learn about what works and what doesn't work. And as it suggests different solutions to you, it can use predictive analytics now to say, in the past, when we've added privacy to a room like this, we've seen utilization go up by a certain amount. Or let's say we've improved ergonomics or added a height adjustable table. We can see that utilization in your experience and in our collective experience as Steelcase has had that kind of performance. Also in the area of learning, something we're really intrigued by is, what if the app gets smarter as it relates to the recommendations on space? So that person who cared a lot about privacy, they could go in and add a filter intentionally that asks for space that has more privacy. But a lot of times we don't know ourselves that well, and the app over time could learn about preferences that the person has just from the ratings they give that could make us smarter about the recommendations. So people who tend to always add comments about privacy, we could just automatically suggest rooms that have more privacy. Or there's people in the office that are always too hot or too cold, and don't you wish that they could find each other? You know, like this hot room could be found by the people that prefer that, and so on. It would make it a lot easier for facility managers and real estate managers, rather than trying to optimize every space, make it perfect for everybody, which is really impossible. We instead help users make better choices, so they're picking the spaces that are actually perfect for them.
So one of the things we love about IoT solutions is, as you deploy them, you start to learn things that you've never learned before, and that often leads to further insights. So in your trials and pilots of this, what are some of the things that you've learned from early adopters?
Yeah, so we did a number of alpha sites first, and a lot of those were on our own spaces, as you like to start at home. And make your mistakes where it's not so visible. And then we began working with clients, and we've had a lot of great beta sites with clients. One of the most challenging ones, and one that we actually asked ourselves if it's really a good idea, we decided to do one with an architectural and design firm in their own space. And I thought that was a tough test, because these guys are really dialed in. I mean, they designed the space. They know the space very well. They're experts at space, so they're observing how they use their space every day.
Sure.
And how could we, if the app is good, could it add another layer of data that even architects and designers would find to be relevant? So we went to work on that. We installed the sensors. We gathered data for a while, and we came back to them and reported the results. And I was happy to discover there were some insights. So, for example, there was a conference room that holds 12 people. And they knew that conference room is one of the most heavily booked spaces that they have. And the data confirmed that. But what they didn't know until they looked at the data is that a lot of times that room is booked not for a 12-person meeting, but for one person to make a phone call. And that happened a lot. Like a high degree of utilization of the space that's in high demand is people who just really want a phone booth. And so they realized they just didn't have enough spaces like that. They needed more spaces where somebody could go and have a private conversation. And probably everybody here can relate to that when you're trying to find a place to make a phone call. So by creating more spaces that do that, you're able to free up a space that's in high demand. And we find this a lot. A lot of the interventions that are required to improve utilization of an underutilized space don't cost a lot of money. I mean, sometimes it's furniture or architecture, but a lot of times it's things like architectural film or a change in use or just the reorientation of the furniture. It can change human behavior. We've never had this data before. We see this as an opportunity to take it really to a whole new level.
That's great. So when's this all available?
Well, all the capabilities you saw there will roll out through a series of waves. The first wave is available now.
Awesome.
And then every 3 months, we'll launch a new wave. So we'll continue to add to the performance of both apps.
It's great. Well, it's exciting stuff, and it's a beautiful, beautiful product you've built. And we're so excited to have you as a partner.
It's been great for us to work with the Microsoft team. Thank you for all your support.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Take care.